Okay, well, I think we're all introduced now. So let's get stuck in. So, thank you everyone for coming on for the panel session. Let's start by exploring, as this is about Bitcoin, its introduction to financial services, let's look at the gap between where we are now and the regulatory, technology, and consumer literacy gaps that need to be filled in order to make Bitcoin go mainstream. So we're clearly not there now. And right now in the UK, banks don't really support Bitcoin, and importantly, they don't support Bitcoin companies. They don't provide banking services. So I was just talking to one exchange just now who are now in the using an Isle of Man financial institution, and so on. So let's take those gaps. What needs to be filled for Bitcoin to go mainstream, do you think, in financial services? Anyone?
I can start. I think one of the main problems with Bitcoin adoption that people have identified here in different contexts is its volatility. And for mainstream consumer adoption to occur, that volatility has to be addressed. And I think that's what we're doing at BitReserve. We allow people to hold their Bitcoin in any form they want of stable value and still spend it and use it as Bitcoin. So I think until volatility is addressed, until Bitcoin, people stop thinking of it as money, but rather as a protocol that allows for free, fast, and easy transfer of value, I think it's going to be difficult for the average consumer to adopt it. As it is now, it's sort of like if you had to learn Esperanto to use email. And I don't think if people had to learn Esperanto to use email, there'd be much adoption of email.
Just explain, how do you reduce the volatility?
Well, we allow you to hold Bitcoin in pounds, dollars, euros, any way you want, but it sits on the Bitcoin network. So you can spend it as Bitcoin, or you can spend it as pounds, dollars, and euros. I mean, after all, we're all here because we want to bypass expensive, slow, and sometimes unfair intermediaries like banks, like money transfer services, like payment processors. So, but we all use money every day, and the money we use, we want to keep using. We don't want to use a new currency, at least the average consumer doesn't. Maybe some people do, but the average consumer does not.
Okay, so this would be, I would hold GBP, but it would be held in a blockchain.
In a reserve chain. It's an internal version of the blockchain which allows for complete transparency. So it's real-time public proof of solvency and accountability. You can hold your Bitcoin as pounds, because that's what you, I guess from your accent, like to use. And you can still spend it anywhere Bitcoin is accepted. So for everyone who has made a lot of money as Bitcoin has gone from being worth nothing to being worth $1,000 and then back down to 600, you could take some of that, hold it as stable value, and spend it as Bitcoin. Or you could just send pounds just the way you send Bitcoin to a friend, fast, free, and easy. I mean, in the end, we're trying to deliver on the promise of Bitcoin, which is to bypass these expensive and slow intermediaries.
Mathias, would that work for you at Fidor?
Totally fine. As Fidor Bank actually being, I guess, one of the very few banks dealing with that issue.
I'm sorry?
I think we're one of the very few banks, by the way, dealing with Bitcoins.
Yes, that's true.
And this issue and environment. We see our role in this actually to be something like a branch to the regulators. This is what we do in our cooperations with Bitcoin exchanges. So this means we try to, besides the volatility, which I totally understand, and I think this is a very, very important issue, we try to address the issues of kind of organizational security, KYCing, anti-money laundering, and all this stuff, which is to regulators kind of a nightmare. This is exactly what, besides the volatility of the issue itself, they are afraid of this anti-money laundering thing, and so on. So together with Bitcoin.de and Kraken, we are working on this and try to increase sustainability by the people trading it, okay? So because this is another angle to this. On the other side, I'm totally buying into what you just said. It's a, as you describe it, Bitcoin is an underlying, a principle underlying, and no matter what you transport after that, if it's a fiat money or if it's a cryptocurrency, you couldn't care less actually. It could be a piece of a forest. you know. If you digitalize it and forward it. If somebody believes into that with this digitalized piece of forest you can acquire whatever you want in future, go for it. We as a bank will support it.
So if you're already doing this, are you delivering on the promise of 0 transaction costs?
Well, we have 0 transaction cost.
You have that. So you are delivering.
In the German market, this is pretty common. In particular, if you talk about closed loop transactions, it's 0. It's a very competitive market. We did open up our community approach by now, banking in future in Russia. I know it's totally different over there. So this is really, let me say, different from country to country.
Avish, what would you?
Yeah. So as an exchange, what we found is most of the banks that we deal with, it's not that they hate Bitcoin or they are technologically incapable of integrating with Bitcoin. It's that they're really concerned, as Mathias was saying, about the money laundering. And in every single jurisdiction that we go into, they're concerned about how you are going to verify your customers, and then how you are going to prevent from people laundering and money and going from Bitcoin to cash. So what we've done as an exchange is just come up with some sort of an education process for all of the banks that we are approaching and say, this is how we do KYC, this is how we do AML, this is how we are currently regulated in each of the different jurisdictions that we're interested in penetrating, and our licensing strategy to go into these jurisdictions. Regulators in most regions have not come out and said, this is what we're going to do from a regulatory guidance perspective. It's been more of a gray area. So from an exchange standpoint, we are constantly figuring out how to be as compliant as we possibly can be, given that we are certainly still operating in a gray area. That's just been the biggest challenge. At some point, more banks like Fidor will flip the switch and decide to come into the space. More banks that we've been talking to have been more forward-thinking and have been closer and closer to actually making a move towards integrating with Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. But it's just an education process.
So you're providing the technology that a bank would use, or are you an external exchange that a bank would approve usage of?
Well, we have 2 types of accounts that we're dealing with right now. The first is just getting an operational account for you to run business operations. And even that, for most Bitcoin companies, is very difficult to get. So actually, the way that we ended up getting our first operational accounts was we leveraged some of our investor network. And then the second one is the far more complex account to get, and that's a custodial account. And when you're trying to get a custodial account, what you're doing is you're taking 2 counterparties that are exchanging cash and Bitcoin, and you have to verify these counterparties and then educate the bank to let the bank know that there is no money laundering happening in this custodial account. The custodial accounts for most exchanges are probably a far ways away. The operational accounts are easier to come by. So we're constantly trying to go and get both of these types of accounts. Okay.
Mathias, were you going to say something then? Or you
no. I'm just in myself laughing about this wording. Educational process with banks. Yeah. Sorry. No, but I know what you mean, but I just thought about it.
How this is looking like. You're a forward thinker. Yeah. You're talking about other bankers.
Yeah, this is why we set up our own bank, actually, because we gave it no chance. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a cultural nightmare, and we spoke about it. I think it's even less a technical issue, it's more a cultural issue. Yeah. There's a reason why people are working in a bank. Yeah, that's it. And on the other side, I think the problem is that those bankers, if you come to a normal high street bank and you talk about Bitcoin, you sit in the compliance office. Yeah. You're not sitting in the transaction office where you should sit, actually. So this is showing you what's happening there, actually. They, as I said, they're scared to death. Why are they scared to death? They do not understand. If they would understand it, if they would deal with it, they would have understood that it's by far less complex, that their most complex option scheme they are trading on and wasting the customer's money on, you know? So, but they, you know, it's probably, I think they're scared because they see not really how to make money of it. This is maybe the other way, you know, because normally even selling a cash fund actually is generating 1.5% revenues all over because they have option schemes in this, or option structures in this cash fund. which is not known to the customer because the customer suddenly is then suffering 25% losses within the financial crisis in a daily cash fund, you know. And I think those are the problems. It's how to make money out of this. This is what they do not understand. It's they do not want to deal with the issue of what the fuck is a blockchain? I don't know, you know. You know, digital lifestyle. Yes, my kids do it. Yeah. And those are the typical answers. Those are the typical answers. And the next problem is they read it in mainstream media. Yeah, say hello to the mainstream media guys. And mainstream media heard it from a friend who did it. Maybe the cousin of a friend did it, you know. Say they didn't try it on themselves. So how you want to make this? This is a nightmare.
I think one of the, sorry to cut you off, and I know you're going to jump in.
Please, I'm married, I'm used to that.
Okay. One of the things that the media has done is they are very interested in coming up with headlines that grab attention.
Yeah.
And so they will come up with very controversial headlines that will grab attention. And some of these headlines will be, you know, the EBA comes out and says, you can't use Bitcoin, or financial institutions can't use Bitcoin. Well, if you actually go through and read the report, you'll find that the message in that report was actually very different from what the headline was. And banks read things at the service level. So
it's as always, like when the price was going up, nobody wrote about it. When the price was very high, they said jump on it. Then the price was collapsing. They said, oh my God, you're all losing your money. Bitcoin is dangerous. Then the price recovered. Nobody noticed.
Right.
So this is typical.
But do you think, Tim, I'll just come back to you. Do you not think that Bitcoin's become the kind of poster boy for virtual currencies, and part of that, I think, is the sensationalism around it. And so in a sense, isn't it positive that the media are kind of, you know, being sensationalist because it's created consumer awareness? And that's my third thing I talked about, which is about literacy and awareness and adoption. So, you know, you really need someone like Brad Pitt to adopt it, you know, to make it really go mainstream. So there is, to an extent, a problem of getting adoption, and maybe the media contribute to that. I'm not defending the media, but I know what you mean. But I just think it might be all part of the process of making people aware of this. And we're going to Tim, and then maybe we'll discuss the consumer adoption side.
Well, I was just going to respond to a few things. The Fidor, for me, and banks like Fidor are the future of banking. They're not invested in this incredibly complex, incredibly inefficient, and completely unfair system. And they're listening to consumers and giving them what they want. What do consumers want? What do we all want? Why are we all here? We want to be able to hold and move money as easily, fast, and free as everything else we do in our life. I mean, at least make it as easy as internet dating, if not as easy as email, right? So you can just, if you have money, you've earned the money, you can send it to anyone you want as fast as digital money, digital anything can go, and it should be free. What don't the consumers want? They don't want billions upon billions of dollars of overdraft fees, right? If you're a merchant, you don't want to pay 4% just to receive payments. If you're a poor or unbanked, you don't want to pay 10% of your hard-earned money to send your money from point A to point B. And I think even if you're wealthy in this system, even if you're Walmart and you're paying 1% on your credit card transactions, or you're so rich the bank doesn't charge you for your $30 for wire transfers, I think even then, anyone with an ounce of compassion doesn't want to be part of a system where the most vulnerable and the poorest pay the most of the little money they have to participate in the system. So I think that is the overriding thing that has everyone so excited, and which I find really thrilling, the passion around Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think you mentioned what is going to actually make Bitcoin go mainstream. I think it's people like BitReserve and Fidor and us coming out with killer applications, and many of the other companies in the space coming out with killer applications that actually give Bitcoin a use case, from jumping into and out of different asset classes, or actually allowing people to be able to use it in a way that solves pain points in whatever area that we're dealing with.
And is that the key point, driving adoption and literacy? Having good products? Do you think that will be enough?
I think having compelling products that, like an example of this completely outside of digital currency is Uber. So Uber was just, it made so much sense that the regulation must change, because why wouldn't there be an Uber? It makes so much sense. I think with Bitcoin, it's going to be similar. And at some point, somebody has to come out with applications for it to just make so much sense. Like, why doesn't X exist, right? So whether that's a remittance application or using the protocol for smart contracts, there's a number of different possibilities, but these applications need to be built.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left.
Financial illiteracy.
Financial illiteracy is an issue in the UK for non-Bitcoin.
Yeah.
People are underinsured, we're underbanked before you even get started. So this is why I asked the question. So consumer literacy and adoption is a major issue.
Absolutely.
For whatever, for GBP, for insurers.
Absolutely. I think people would have a much better life, actually, if they would take care about their money. This is the simple truth. A lot of people, and in particular those ones you mentioned who are paying the biggest bills at banks, think they have not enough money to think about their money, which is kind of a, how do you say, vicious circle?
Vicious circle.
Yeah. As we say in German, Todesspirale.
Sounds scarier in
German.
Yeah,
I know. All the wordings in German sound scary to you. I know. This is like Weltmeisterschaft, which means world champion. 7-1.
Yeah.
That's just the beginning. No. I've heard a lot of Germans are living in Argentina. No, just skip it. No, but I lost it. What I'm talking about is financial illiteracy is a big issue to all societies, actually. It's no difference whether this is in the UK or in Germany. I think we had a survey in Germany going on whether people would be capable in calculating their interest rate on a saving account, and they did an actual interest rate which was, if it's 2%, it's a lot, so like 1% per year, and you had to calculate it for 5 years, and 75% failed. Yes, simply failed to do this. So asking for the mainstream in this context, I think is a little bit overambitious, to be honest. And I'm really not sure if it should be mainstream. I might doubt that, actually. So to twist it a little bit into a different direction. Nevertheless, what we experience is whoever is dealing with Bitcoin is extremely educated in this point, knows what he or she is doing, is not afraid of this volatility like the one who is not in the Bitcoin. I think it is very interesting that the ones who are not dealing with it are afraid of the volatility. They couldn't care less. If I'm not eating meat, why should I bother about any kind of cow disease? Nevertheless, Fidor Bank's answer to illiteracy in financial issues, no matter if fiat currencies or crypto or whatever, precious metals, which you could count into this as well, our answer to this is a community, because we said, listen, if you do not talk about your money matters, you never will improve. So this is why we said we have to kick it off with a community. You have to start talking the way you talk to peers, other fellows, via mobile at 9:45 in the night when you think about precious metals, because this is the first time you can think about your money matters. You have to talk about it. And don't go to a normal, and this is another problem, don't go to an ordinary bank, because ordinary banks are only talking to you if this is a sales pitch. So there's no front-end load with Bitcoin. This is why a bank will maybe have a problem with it.
The one point that you just mentioned makes sense to me, and I think is very important, which is consumers don't want to be involved in the complexity of technology. Consumers, when they use email, don't understand how the email works, and they don't want to understand how the email works. The goal of BitReserve, the goal of any successful consumer-facing tech company has to be to make it dead simple to use and to hide all the complexity. Bitcoin is incredibly complex. For the average person, they are never, ever, ever going to use it, and they're never going to understand it. However, if you can hide that complexity, they will use it because it's going to be free, fast, and easy. So anything you make free, fast, and easy, consumers love. Yeah. If they have to wade through a mass of complexity to get to that free, fast, and easy, they won't. It's proven over and over again.
Yeah. Totally right. I don't have to be an engineer to drive a car.
Right. So we've got about 5 minutes left, I think. Is that right, Pamir? Where are you? I can't see him. Okay. So if we move forward to, let's say we tick the regulatory box, we tick the technology box, and we tick the consumer literacy and adoption box, So we end up with Bitcoin, fine. So what does this new world of financial services look like? Is Bitcoin just another Euro account, or what are the characteristics of having Bitcoin mainstream? What new services would we get as maybe consumers, SMEs, maybe enterprises, if we ticked all these boxes? What would it look like? What's special about this?
Yeah, so blockchain technology is very disruptive to every single area of finance: trade settlements, remittances, merchant services and payments. Just having things on a blockchain, for instance, trade settlements for one thing. Imagine if every asset on Lehman Brothers was on a blockchain. The outcome of 2008 would have been completely different.
Why?
Right?
Why?
Because you can now account for illiquid assets, or you can account for, there's public accounting for private assets, right? And there's more transparency. And when you're actually talking about trade settlements and you're dealing with derivatives and credit markets, these are areas that are very, very complex. And if everything is settled on a blockchain, there's public accountability and more transparency into these markets. So, there's so many different opportunities for blockchains to excel in very different areas.
So on that point, what are you saying here? That there would have been, the transparency would have not allowed traders to hide losses, or what are you saying?
I can speak to that for a second. Yeah, this is one of the innovations that we've introduced with BitReserve that Garrick Hilleman mentioned, is real-time public transparency. And what that means is that you can clearly see what is going on with the obligations that a financial firm has to its members or its depositors, and the assets that that firm holds derived from those deposits. In other words, so I think the point of the 2008 financial crisis, or Mt. Gox, or MF Global with John Corzine, or any of these disasters, Bernie Madoff, is that if you have transparency and you can see the risk that you're exposing yourself to by participating in a financial firm, then you can make an educated decision as to whether you want to adopt that risk or not. As it is now with banks, they're black boxes. Every quarter, they produce a balance sheet, but they mush together all of the assets and liabilities. They don't separate it out, so you really don't know what you're being exposed to. And for that reason, every 10 years, they blow up. They blow up because nobody inside or outside knows what risk is really being run. I know Fidor Bank's not going to have that happen, but that's what everyone made a big deal about Mt. Gox. But in 2008, every single bank in the United States and a lot of the banks throughout the world went bankrupt. That happened. Why? Because they weren't transparent. Because people put their money in banks and you have no idea what they're doing with them. So with us, we publish a real-time, public accounting that is verifiable of our assets and liabilities, so it's a real-time proof of solvency. And I think that is one of the great legacies of Bitcoin, will be that transparency, to Avish's point.
And I think transparency is the best regulation you can have. Actually,
right.
It's the best educator, it's the best regulator. It's definitely not the easiest. It can be a pain sometimes, but on the other side, it's the most sustainable thing you can do, transparency. On the other side, or additionally to this, coming to your question, what is the future of services looking like, or financial services looking like? I think two main phrases, two main wordings for this: integrative and open, and transparent. So integrative in a way that you as a customer or user of this financial services, you're not, let me say, the so-called target group of a sales force, and by that kind of a victim to them. Target and victim I regard to come out of the same family, actually. But you are a kind of educated, here we go again, educated or willing to educate user of financial options you have in this environment, which are from innovative to classic, from more exciting to maybe boring. You make your choice, you collect it the way you want it, and by that integrative, because you define your product scheme, and do whatever you want. And then you also have the chance to say, listen, I want to borrow money from maybe the bank, or I want to borrow money from the community, and I want to borrow pounds from the bank and maybe some bitcoins from the community. So you aggregate it the way according to your digital lifestyle. This is our vision, actually. And this is why we created this platform. And this is why we now recently had a developer day in which we introduced the developers to our first kind of family of APIs you could use for your business, for your services, docking on in 10 minutes and make transactions out of that. This I regard to be open. I think it needs to be, because open to me is the opposite of black box. And yes, black box, just look around us. It's a black box. Nice glass windows, but black box.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the end. So I'm just going to summarize what I think you've said, which I think is really interesting, which is, you're not really looking to just add Bitcoin products alongside all the other products. What you're saying is it will be transformational to the whole financial or be transformational to the financial services system, positively transformational through transparency and so on. So it's not just that you end up with a Bitcoin mortgage or a Bitcoin current account. You're talking about something on a far grander scale, basically. It's about opening up this black box. So that's really where this is headed. That's where you think it's headed.
Bitcoin has changed everything, and I think it's one of the greatest phenomenons of my lifetime, certainly. It has introduced the idea that you can bypass intermediaries that are slow, expensive, and unfair to transfer the fruit of your labor. And I think that is an incredibly powerful concept. And it's introduced another one, which is transparency, that you don't have to rely on third parties to say that they're solvent, and you can have real-time public transparency. Those two things are going to change everything.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Very revealing. So, I think we hand over to Pamir. I don't know.
They're all sleeping.
He's asleep. Who are we handing over to? Here we go. We've got a question.
Hello. My name is Ira Miller. I'm the CEO of Coinapult, and I have a question for Mathias. I'm a big fan of Fidor Bank and the kind of model that you've worked out with Bitcoin.de. And I was very curious. You expressed a moment ago the difficulty that you've had talking with other bankers about Bitcoin. But banking is a network, and a completely separate regulatory network from a lot of other financial services. And you have to work with other banks to function. So I was curious, how did you approach your corresponding banks and kind of upstream banks about this problem and the transactions that you're doing with Bitcoin.de?
Well, actually, we try. It is really totally different from business to business and from concept to concept. But the wonderful situation we are in as a bank is that we can be the correspondence bank, actually. And we really, in some moments, couldn't care less about the problems culturally or technically of other banks. I do not fully subscribe what you said. Thank you very much, first of all, for talking about Fidor. But on the other side, we do not really need other banks for doing what we do with Bitcoin.de, for instance. We do not need it. So this is what, with Bitcoin.de, what we are talking about is setting up closed-loop transactions so that whenever there is a transaction, it will be executed real-time and also on a Sunday and so on in a fully licensed account. We all can provide this on our own. We do not need a third-party bank to do so. And normally I try to avoid talking about Bitcoins with bankers. It's not a very satisfying thing. It's like talking to a vegetarian about your last barbecue, you know.
Should we? Can we run a mic?
Got some great analogies.
Yeah, you know, I've got kids.
Where are you going? Okay. The lights over there.
There's somebody as well.
Oh, no.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm with an online payment organization called Skrill, and I've got a question to you about regulation. Because so far, I mean, what makes Bitcoin stand out is that it's fairly unregulated. But let's say in a couple of years, when it becomes more and more accepted and bigger, do you think it will stay this way, or do you think that the central banks of the many countries in the European Union will introduce some kind of regulation and legislation about Bitcoins? Because I don't believe that the central banks will give up the power that they have now in our system.
Whom do you ask?
All of you. All
of us. Well, may I jump first?
Please.
If you does anybody know Vaurum Bank in Switzerland? Vaurum Bank, W-I-R? Yeah, you know them? So Vaurum Bank, maybe I'm giving you this example, nevertheless. Vaurum Bank is a small bank based in Basel, which started their existence back in, I think, 1932. So pretty much after the last big crisis. And they started existing with their own currency, which is called the Wir, which means, if you translate it, it's called we. Okay? So why did they start it? Because currencies after the last 29 crisis had a big problem, obviously, and they said, if we deal with each other, and this is like people building houses and so on, you know, all this construction people to real estates and so on. So if we deal with each other, we want to have a currency that is sustainable, that is a proper currency, that is not suffering the financial crisis and so on. That happened 1932. So think about how modern Bitcoin is. The Swiss National Bank integrates the Wir into its report. The Wir is approximately, I would say, accounting for 1.5% of the Swiss national product. Maybe not that precise figures, but the range is, I think, the range is right. So there are living examples, first of all. Second, what we tell to the regulators is that if you think about, in no matter what way, that banning something like that is the appropriate answer, you will be totally wrong. Why? Because, and we see that in China, we see it in Russia, banning something like that and trying to ignore it by banning means only that the business is going abroad. It does not mean that the business is suddenly stopping. Don't you ever think that a Russian is impressed by a Russian law? There's a proverb in Russia saying we have the strictest laws on earth, but we don't follow them. So they just trade outside Russia. And this is what's happening. So this is why we tried to convince Bundesbank and BaFin to say, listen, do a proper regulation, no matter if you see it as a currency or as a trading good or whatever, as an asset. We don't care, actually, but just do a proper regulation. Let us help those companies to get this regulation executed, but don't you ever think you can ban it. Fidor Bank is the only bank that is delivering first-hand information out of this industry to the regulator. And believe me, every time we sit there, they are totally stunned by that. It's a very positive meeting always. And normally they get information out of newspapers. So if you want to remain on the newspaper information level, you have to ban it. But then you will have the complaints of your customers who are losing money with it. So I don't think, and it's not about money power. I don't believe it. If you have a look to the total assets of what is Bitcoin now valued, it's, don't get it wrong, but to the total assets of a state, it's minor. Yeah, it's not even a mid-sized mutual fund. Fidelity wouldn't put one manager on this. A junior one, maybe.
You guys want to pick up on this?
Fidelity has very good funds, by the way.
You guys want to pick up on this? Do you guys want to pick up on this?
I feel like the regulators have been incredibly patient and actually quite circumspect with regard to Bitcoin, especially given the affiliations and the uses that Bitcoin has had in the past, in its early days. I also think they have a full understanding that they can't ban it. As someone pointed out today. And because I think, in general, regulators have the best interests of consumers in mind. I don't think they're evil forces that are trying to oppress technology or innovation. I think they're circumspect, because that's what they're paid to do. And I think they want to protect consumers. And I think what they're worried about is consumers getting into this Bitcoin thinking that it's money, and it dropping in value by half, and the consumer losing its money, or merchants accepting Bitcoin and having their profit margins erased. So I think they're waiting and watching, and I think they're hoping that, in fact, Bitcoin will solve a lot of the problems of this incredibly unfair and expensive and slow system, where banks take money, charge a lot for moving money, and then blow up and get rescued by the government. So I think regulators are watching and waiting. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and no regulation has changed unless it's been tested. So by nature, all regulation remains status quo. And Bitcoin is doing a great job to test financial regulation, and it will force regulators to adopt new ways to actually regulate and adapt to virtual currencies. So.
We're telling the Bundesbank always, we're telling them, listen, every kind of internet innovation is coming out of an imperfect or, high margin, unperfect market. So this is exactly the same with the Bitcoin, and we are always telling them, see it as a competition. Make your system better. Don't ban the one thing, make yours better. Just make it better, improve it, just pick it up.
Okay, should we take one? I'm not sure how we do it. How do we do it on
3.
time? We take one more question, or at least one more question here.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Number 3, microphone number 3.
That one works.
So given the growth and development of the broader Bitcoin and altcoin ecosystem, do you guys think it has the potential to challenge the US dollar and other major fiat currencies as the world reserve currency?
I think Bitcoin is going to serve as a vehicle to get into and out of various different asset classes. I think it will wipe out certain currencies in the world that aren't very prevalent, like Zimbabwe dollars, perhaps. I think the US dollar and the euro and the pound, G10 currencies are here to stay. They're not going to be disrupted by Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is going to serve as a vehicle to get into, from one to another. So,
I think modernly managed currencies are very flexible things and can respond to this, picking up this development, and by that supporting the development and integrating it into the family of currencies. I believe in this, yes. But replacing, wow, that's a big target, isn't it? It's a big world finally.
I'm an American. We couldn't even get the metric system to be adopted in the United States. And the metric system doesn't move versus the old system. So no, it's never going to be adopted as a currency.
But finally you drive on the right side of the, of the street, not like on this island.
Right, that's right.
Continent isolated.
So if the answer is no, does that answer your question? The answer is no, basically. Any other? Should we take one more?
Some more.
Okay, here we go.
Maybe to expand on that question a little bit, when Bitcoin is ubiquitously accepted around the world, why would people want to hold dollars or euros or pounds instead of Bitcoin?
You're assuming that it's going to be ubiquitously held around the world.
I am assuming that. Do you disagree with that, and if so, why?
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I think this is a very, very early space, and there's still a lot of vulnerabilities. Bitcoin it's new technology, and it can be broken, and so there are certain things that it does well, and there's certain things that it it isn't even regulated right now. So at some point in the future, if it's universally adopted, how does that affect mining? How does that affect transaction fees? We don't know. I think those are all things that are yet to be determined. So it's very speculative. That's a very speculative assumption.
But let's assume the technology challenges are dealt with. Let's assume the regulators take it on board, and they will react. Do you think it will become ubiquitous?
I think.
What else is stopping? If it's not a technology issue, and the regulators will regulate. I always make this joke, and I say, if we all use jammy Dodgers as currency, the regulator will regulate it. Yeah. They'll follow. So if those objections are removed, what stops it becoming ubiquitous?
No,
nothing. So it could happen.
Nothing. But out of our perspective, I would say I wouldn't be too religious on this. Kind of saying, listen, I really leave it up to the customer. If there is there's a very good reason for having kind of an asset allocation, which means it's not only one asset, it's more than one asset, because this is more reducing your personal risk. And this asset allocation is according to the personal experiences, targets, and so on. So I I wouldn't think like that this should be the goal, actually. I think, and it would be totally contradictory to what I think, at least our vision is, to be open, because even if it's innovative, we can close it. But then we didn't do anything good on it. I think it's, even for the Bitcoin, it's better to remain in a very open and competitive environment.
People get very religious about Bitcoin, and there seems to be a lot of, you sound like, your tone of voice sounds like you're religious about it. So when people get religious about things, it's hard to respond without hurting anyone's feelings or, getting people upset. So all I can say is that, in my experience, money doesn't do this. It doesn't go up and down. Money retains its value, so you can use it one day, the next day, in 10 years, and if it does, even when it goes down in value, when it becomes devalued, people think of prices going up, not money becoming devalued. So there's one issue. The other issue is people vote every day what money they want to use. Here, it's pounds. In the US, it's dollars. You can go into a bank and get euros for your dollars, and you can walk around trying to offer euros around and pay with euros, right? You can do the same thing with Bitcoin. The fact is, people have already decided. They like using dollars. It's like language. It's like the air we breathe. It's cultural. It's a language we speak. So, yeah, Bitcoin is awesome. I love Bitcoin. But the fact is, you don't speak Esperanto. I don't speak Esperanto. No one here probably knows even what Esperanto is. And the fact is, it was this language that people wanted to introduce that was going to be incredibly easy and fast and useful for everybody. But people already had a language. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're all done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.